Pow Comic Hour with your host, Andrew Honor.
And Chris Ramos.
Tonight, we are covering Young Avengers by Allen Heinberg and Jim Cheung. This is also a very special episode for us because this is our 50th episode.
50.
Yes, we've been doing this for a little over 2 years, and we thank all of our viewers and audience for jumping on this train with us.
All of our listeners.
Yes, absolutely. We really appreciate you having along for the ride, and we're so excited to talk about this amazing story. What'd you think about it, Ramos?
Well, like my knee-jerk reaction on it was
Yes.
It was just a lot of fun. It's just a fun way. It's nothing like, I mean, they tried to do things that were emotional or, groundbreaking kind of things or big changes for the characters, but it was just fun. It was a good read. So that's why I think it's a great 50th episode for us to just get back to the Avengers, but not the Avengers, the newer Avengers that are based on sort of the old Avenger. It was just a cool restart.
Yeah. And there are strong possibilities that the Young Avengers will be seen on the big screen, hopefully in the next, 5 years, maybe 2 to 3 years. Just depends how fast they take it.
Yeah, I mean, big screen or what, Disney Plus
Yeah,
or whatever,
I think
maybe.
This would make a great Disney Plus TV series.
Yeah, or just a great like reboot for the movies.
Absolutely. Get a new audience in, or just kind of recultivating it, gives some new breath into it. Absolutely. So I read The Young Avengers by Allen Heinberg and Jim Cheung in the omnibus that came out last fall. And how did you read this, Ramos?
Well, I read it technically as the Ultimate Collection, which is a little different than a complete collection. They just start throwing in all sorts of other adjectives. But
right.
The Ultimate Collection is usually like a straight run. This one had 12 issues, which was the 12 core issues. And then they kind of went off into crossovers and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So, that like the first 12 issues is what we're going to be covering. But the omnibus goes into like the entire first stretch, I would say, of the Young Avengers. It collects Avengers the first volume, which was 1 through 12. Then they have their Civil War tie-in. The Young Avengers Presents 1 through 6, Secret Invasion, Dark Reign, Siege, and then the conclusion with Avengers: The Children's Crusade. So we just wanted to stick with the first core 12 issues because it gives you the gist of what the run's all about.
Mm-hmm.
And before we start going more in depth, we'll just kind of give you the initial spoiler warning. It's a little hard to cover this collection without going into like who the Avengers are, who some of these characters are related to, and some of like how the connections are formed.
Yeah, so pause here and then go read everything and then come back in like 3 or 4 days.
Sure.
And then you can listen to the rest of this podcast.
Yeah. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to pick this as well is this is one of the books, the Young Avengers series. I got the first trade, the Family Matters run, was one of the first trades I ever picked up. And so this was the era that got me into comics.
Well, because like this was back in the Avengers Disassembled era.
Right after that.
So right when Avengers Disassembled happened was probably like, okay, I'm going to just be smart here.
Sure,
probably 2000, the year 2000.
Okay.
Am I right?
Maybe, I think you're pretty close.
Maybe 1999.
Yeah.
How close am I?
Avengers Disassembled was 2004 to 2005.
Oh gosh, I'm way off. All right.
So not too bad, but the Young Avengers first appearance was April 2005. So it was just kind of like coming off the tailcoats of that, trying to wrap up.
Disassembled was right before.
It was House of M.
House of M, yeah, because that's when like Scarlet Witch kind of lost her marbles.
Yeah, what was the 3 words that she uttered?
No more mutant.
Yes,
that's gonna be a trivia question.
Yeah,
we got it.
The new Avengers was going as well.
Yes.
So it was kind of like the old guard was done. They were still wanting to continue the team. Brian Michael Bendis was like, hey, I'll put a new Avengers team of like Iron Man, Captain America, but then they had Wolverine and Spider-Man and Luke Cage and some of these newer ones that kind of came along as an aftermath.
Yeah, and this is, Marvel doing, I guess the easiest way to say this is Marvel every once in a while needs to bring in some new readers.
Yes.
So they're like, let's change things up. Let's switch things up. So like for every big change in the Marvel universe, they kind of introduce young versions of things to
Yeah.
kind of pull in some new readers. And that's, every big comic book company does that. DC does that a lot, but
Yeah.
DC does it with
Like
like
a crisis.
their
They just
crisis.
blow it all up.
Yeah, they just blow it all up and they bring back the same people. And they
Marvel
just kinda
doesn't
start
do
over.
that.
Marvel
Not
tries to
really.
bring, newer readers through the same age group. And that's always been
Yeah.
Marvel's thing, is that they focus on age groups more than they focus on legacy characters.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
there's only so many times you can bring back Superman as a Superboy, but Marvel actually legitimately comes up with new characters that are young to bring in
Yes.
a new younger base.
Oh, I think the writers also want like something to own as well. I think
Yeah.
that's what every writer, they want to see their characters go on to do something else. Every time you create a new character, you own that character.
Yeah,
It's kind of
something
like
fresh.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the comic starts out with Jessica Drew.
Yeah.
And
From Alias.
I always liked her
Jewel.
as a
Yeah,
character.
I think her name was
I think she really did. Was it Jessica Drew? Yeah, it's Jessica Drew. right?
Jones.
Jones.
Jessica Jones, yes.
Jessica Jones. And she, I always thought she was a good like ground level character
Yeah.
to sort of like be this gateway in for people to see superheroes, because while she was a superhero herself, she
Yes.
wasn't like a tights
No,
superhero
she
every day.
already had her time as a superhero. Said, "Hey, this isn't for me. I'm more of a reporter. I'm more of a." She goes into she's like a PI,
Mhm.
does some criminal investigations. That's what she's known for.
And she's pregnant. in
And
this
she's
one,
pregnant
so
at the
she's
start of this as
with
well.
Luke Cage's
Yes.
baby.
Yes. Which will be really interesting if they ever decide to do anything with those characters again. But yeah, that was really cool. Like, it's Jessica Jones, another character from like her time at the Pulse, when she worked on like this private magazine that she was doing, and then it's J. Jonah Jameson, and they just talking about like, hey, we're looking for some weird things that are going on. Hey, what's this Young Avengers thing?
Yeah.
Why'd you call it the Young Avengers? Why'd you put a question mark on it?
Yeah, so
Well-
she named them, and
Mhm.
and it's kind of cool because you were introduced right away into these characters. You don't need background. There isn't an origin story.
No.
It's just there are heroes out there, and they are very similar to the regular Avengers. So then
Yes.
people are like, hey, this is kind of like the Young Avengers,
Mhm. Absolutely.
because you could tell they're teenagers.
Yes. Younger.
You could tell they're much younger.
Yes. And so she's the one that like J. Jonah Jameson is like, hey, you could probably approach them, see if you can get an interview, find out why the two got together, do that investigative journalism when she was
Mhm.
still working there. And it's like, I don't know. Why do you want me to do it? Because you're the most relatable. I'm not going to do it. She's not going to do it. You were an Avenger, right? You had some time in the Avengers. You're all close with them.
Yeah.
Come on. I don't want to use my connections. But you do know them, right? Like, you could talk to them.
Go find out what's their
What's the deal? So
So-
she's like, I'll see if I can work it out.
So at first they have one that kind of looks like Iron Man, one that kind of looks like the Hulk,
Yes.
one that kind of sort of looks like a young Captain America, but people are calling him Bucky, sort of. That's like this kind of chef. And then one that's just like a straight up wizard who's just
Right.
throwing lightning bolts from his
Yeah.
staff. So that's kind of cool too.
Absolutely.
Oh, and he had like a Thor. He had like a Thor helmet.
Yeah.
It kind of looked like
Mhm.
he was throwing lightning bolts, and he kind of had a Thor helmet. So I was like, okay, he's the Thor.
Right. Yeah. So it was really cool to see these characters like shoot down in just all their glory. And even though you come to find out they actually never got the okay or blessing of like Captain America and Iron Man, like
Yeah.
some of the core Avengers, right? Because Thor was off somewhere else. He was still banished in Asgard, I think, when this was going on. So those were the only two
And
like
Captain America and Iron Man are just kind of like
they're stewards of
hanging
still
back,
of the
yeah.
Avengers. Yep.
They're the only like last two Avengers, because after Scarlet Witch attacked the Avengers mansion,
Yeah.
she pretty much wiped out almost everybody, including
Yeah,
Jarvis, right? Like, you know,
yeah, like the three she killed were, and you'll know this as you keep going, was Jack of Hearts,
Ant-Man.
Ant-Man, and someone else.
Vision.
Vision, yes, that was
Yeah.
the big three.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so those were, you still feel the shell shock of like, hey, this was a traumatic event. We don't want to hurt anyone else. We don't want to get anyone else killed. They were the reason, we felt like we were the reason why they got killed and putting
Right.
them in danger.
So Captain America and Iron Man just sort of felt like the Avengers had disbanded into
Yeah.
chaos pretty much,
Right.
and then so they just sort of
You know,
went away.
the Avengers mansion is still in shambles. Like they haven't touched the site. They did the bare minimum cleanup, kind of locked everything in
Mhm.
storage, and said good day. So when they find out there is a Young Avengers team that are starting to call themselves that, they're like, "Whoa, what's the deal
Yeah,
here?"
you're gonna get killed.
Yeah. So they do a good job or a fairly decent job, you know, saving some people from a fire and things like that. And when Captain America and Iron Man find this out, they say, you know, like, "Oh, Jessica Jones, do you know anything about this? No. Do you know anything about this? No." So their job is to shut the Young Avengers down because their fear is that they will cause more trouble than they're worth, and they don't want to see those heroes get killed
Mhm.
because they're still very trauma and trying like PTSD, and they're like they just feel responsible. So that was really cool, like to see like, okay, how would you go about rebuilding a team, especially one with such legacy and everything. So that was really cool.
Well, and one part of this too is, Captain America and Iron Man show up, and you can tell these young Avengers have a deep respect for the
Yes.
original Avengers. So when Captain America and Iron Man show up and they say, "What are you kids doing?"
Yeah.
They're almost shocked into being a kid again. They're like, "Well, we have powers. We want to help people. We want to just do what we can."
Yeah.
And it kind of goes back to the whole, with great power comes great responsibility.
Absolutely.
It's like you would want people that apparently find out they have powers. You would want them to say, "I'll use my powers for good." So when these kids just automatically, their first response is, "We want to do what we can," and Iron Man and Captain America is no. They feel kind of like rejected by the
Yeah.
legacy characters of
Right.
just
And that
like,
was such a
"Hey,
big
like,
feeling that their idols, their heroes are
yeah."
telling them no. They
And they're like,
threaten
"No,
them.
go home or we'll call
Yeah.
your parents."
Yeah, that was
Remember
the
their
big thing. I'm
parents was
like, I would get the same reaction. And that's probably why I gravitated so much to these characters. I'm like, yeah, what if that were to happen? Would
And
you
they're like,
want
"Well,
somebody?
don't talk to our parents. We'll
Parents.
just leave." So it was really funny to me though. Like their biggest fear was their parents
Parents.
finding out
Yep.
that they were,
Right.
moonlighting as superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
But then you do realize, well, you do find out that, like we said, spoiler, the one who looks like Iron Man,
Yes.
is actually a future version of Kang.
Kang, the
Uh,
Conqueror.
so it was poignant for now because now the Ant-Man movie is out,
Yes.
and it's like, all right, anything dealing with Kang has been very popular,
Mm-hmm.
and here's one of the stories right out of Avengers Disassembled to talk
Yeah.
about Kang.
Yes, absolutely. And it was really like nobody really seen that coming. I don't think, and until this would come out, there's not really signs of that. Earlier in the history and stuff, they
No.
fought Kang. They have this big rivalry with him, but having a young Kang as like a Iron Man fanboy, okay,
Yeah.
what can we do that? All
All
right,
right, a young Kang trying to just be a superhero
yeah,
and realizing that he is Kang and that he knows what that will
entails,
eventually come
yes,
to. Yeah, so it was weird. So that was the first big reveal in the first issue, and almost every issue after this is some kind of reveal, some
yeah.
kind of like mic drop of moment of
Sure.
like, wow,
And I
that
guess that's a
happened.
good segue to introduce who the team members are. So, like we said, Iron Lad, sorry, Iron Lad, aka Young King the Conqueror. Then they have Patriot, Elisha Bradley, however you want to pronounce that.
Or Eli.
Eli, his nickname is Eli. He is the great grandson of the original Captain America. Now you say, well, Steve Rogers is the original Captain America, right? Well, back in the day, when then they kind of retconned this information, that his grandfather was like the early test in the super soldier serum. So they were like among the black fighters in like a World War II or pre-World War II. He was part of those experiments of trying to work out the super soldier serum. So they tried it on him, and I think he was the only surviving member of like his unit that would survive it, which is really like wow, there's a whole thing.
Yeah, and they kind of touched on that a little bit
Yeah,
in the
a Falcon and Winter
Falcon
Soldier.
and Winter Soldier
Yep.
series.
And then there is Wiccan. Wiccan is the spellcaster of the group. He is his actual first like iteration here is called Asgardian, but that didn't stick. He changed his name to Wiccan.
Yeah,
But
it's funny because the whole Wiccan thing is like his staff, and then
yeah,
he based his costume
around Thor because
uh,
he was a Thor fan.
right, and then so he just figured, well, at that time, all he could do was throw lightning
Lightning.
bolts, so he just said, well, I'm just
Yeah.
call me Wiccan because I'm like more of a witch
Yeah.
hair idea.
And then Hulkling, he is very much he looks like the Hulk, but he's actually the son of Captain Marvel, who is like a big Kree warrior. And then he is the mother, and then his mother was Princess Annabelle or Anil
Yeah,
of like the Kree Empire. So like the queen of the queen
yeah,
and king. And so there's some ties to like the Kree Scroll War
and
from
so
the
he
Roy Thomas
has
area. So that was kind of cool how they retconned that.
well, and I really like that too, where he had like shape shifting abilities, but he
He also had
chose to
superhuman
just
strength
be
too.
yeah,
Yeah.
and he just chose to be like the Hulk. He was like, well, I'll
Yeah.
just be kind of this crazy Hulk looking guy.
Absolutely.
Where in reality, he's kind of like a blonde guy, just a
Yeah.
regular, well, I guess, or maybe is that his true form?
Sure.
His true form is that younger blonde guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then so those were like the four prime Young Avengers. And then they slowly start to introduce Hawkeye, aka Kate Bishop, which we've seen in the Hawkeye TV series.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had a young Vision. So it was Vision, but then it was some continuity changes with Iron Lad because Iron Lad couldn't stay the whole time. So he's
Well,
like
like they rebuilt Vision,
Vision.
but he
He had
had
so like his
just
armor.
yeah,
And,
like he
yeah.
just rebooted, so he's like a Vision that's like a few months
Yeah.
old
Yep.
or something like
Yeah.
that.
I think he had some memory wipes, but he has like
Mhm.
the database and stuff. So and then Cassie Lang, which is the daughter of Scott Lang. So we mentioned him earlier in the podcast. He was one of the Avengers that died during the House Avengers disassembled era, kind of there, and that was super traumatic experience. And she was talks about her memories like growing up in the Avengers like complex, their mansion, and because she was super little and like she misses her dad so much because
Mhm.
he was like an Avenger. He was part of the legacy, and even though he started out as a criminal, redeemed himself, but she just feels like there was no justice for him either.
Yeah. And it's just been weighing on her. So, it's kind of part of the Marvel and all the movies and everything else is that, if your parents were, y- first class, top shelf, like superheroes, you almost want to emulate them. And a lot of, that kind of just falls back into kids being exactly like their parents or exactly
Yes.
not like their parents. So the kids who are seeing their actual parents being in the news and everything else, and they find out that, they have the same fearlessness and they have the same
Yep.
powers. Like, why not? I think I'll just be a superhero also. Well, I think at first in this sort of like naive youth
Yeah.
idea, being a superhero is like the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
And that's where the writing in this comes out really, really well, is because they write it as them being like, this is going to be a great time. And issue after issue, something comes up where they're
Yes.
like, wow, I didn't expect it to get this serious, or
Hmm.
well, I didn't think one of us were gonna, get captured, or like they
Yeah, it's
don't
a lot harder than they expected.
yeah, they don't realize the stakes are pretty high.
Yep.
And as they learn a little more about their own origins,
Hmm.
they realize they have some, responsibility to own up to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was cool how they kind of weaved in all that legacy into the series without actually you might not even know a lot of the stuff, but
Yeah, I
they
thought that
slowly
was cool
introduce it.
too.
Like
Yeah.
this is very new reader friendly or a great jumping on point to where you're like, hey, I want to know about this reference they dropped. Where can I read that? And they kind of allude to like where you could read it. But it was just a great run. I love this run.
You just need like basic knowledge of the Avengers, which
Yeah,
actually, I
the
mean,
MCU does a fairly
watching,
different.
yeah, I was
Yeah,
just gonna say, watching the movies kind of would help you with that. Usually,
yeah,
we try to separate the movies from the comics,
sure.
but in this instance, if you wanted to start reading a comic and you saw Young Avengers, that would be a great one to read after you've seen the movies
Yeah.
because they haven't fully
Introduced the
introduced.
whole cast.
Right.
We've got like 3/4 of the way there. Like we haven't seen that version of Kang, and we haven't seen that version of the Vision.
And now you'll be like, hey, I've got extra knowledge of when this actually comes out. And
Yeah.
now I know the team. Now
Yes.
I know the idea.
Right. And so, like, yeah, their first fight, their first bad guy is Kang the Conqueror, the real one that comes back and tries to rewrite history.
Yeah.
Like, that's a tall order. Even for the Avengers, that was a pretty tall order. So, they're kind of like trying to face like some of the Avengers villains. Like, okay, that's pretty prominent. That raises the stakes. Time travel is a huge thing. And then you start getting into like, all right, how can we go back and try to resolve some of your issues with your parents, or try to treat that legacy seriously?
Well, and when you think about it too, like the Avengers, when that came out in the 60s, the very first villain that they fought was Loki.
Yeah.
And that was just Thor being like, oh, great, it's Loki. I know
Mhm.
what he's doing. And this one, their first villain is Kang,
Yeah, and I
which is kind
guess.
of cool for them to say, oh, and Iron Land was like, oh, I know
Mhm.
Kang. I'm the young Kang. And
Yep.
this is how it is.
That's actually a
So,
good comparison.
yeah. So they kind of like brought a character into the team that the first villain is directly responsible for that,
Yeah.
and they wanted to make sure it was part of that.
Right. And so they kind of just go through they're fighting like Mr. Hyde, they're fighting just all sorts of different themes, and then they go into like some societal themes of like drug use and
Yeah.
and some like trauma. They're just some PTSD, how to struggle with like what's right and wrong, like when they have the MGH problems of
Hmm.
just doing steroids. It was kind of like when we reviewed the Green Lantern, Green Arrow
Yes.
series.
Yes.
And when Speedy gets caught doing heroin for the first time, that was kind of like that moment,
Yeah.
or at least
Well,
very influenced by it.
and for this too, Captain America and Iron Man are trying to um, fight these villains, just the two of them.
Right.
And while they are telling these kids, just go home, this is our fight, we'll handle it, they realize that they can't just do it without the kids.
Yes.
So then, the kids start getting hurt and
Hmm.
they start, getting actually really hurt. And
Yeah.
they kind of start blaming Captain America and Iron Man because they wanted
And
them to
train them.
and
Yes.
they said, if you had only trained us, then we would have been able to fight through this. But since we're just stumbling around on our own, it's like,
Yeah. Thanks, man.
yeah, it's like, could
we'll
you
take
guys
a-
help us out just a little bit
No.
here?
Right.
And Captain America and Iron Man, they're being like parents, and they're just like, no, you don't know what we know, and we have decades of experience.
Yep.
And the other problem is the kids are just being, upstart kids. Like,
Yep.
well, we're gonna figure it out as we go.
Yes.
So they don't want to hear about it from the older guys.
Yeah, and they're like, "Well, did you know everything when you started being a hero?"
Yeah.
Not really. The most experienced one was Captain America, and he came on late.
And they're fighting all the Avengers villains. So
Yeah.
it's kind of funny that they're like, well, you guys could train us on how to fight these villains, or we could just figure it out ourselves. And they do a
Yes.
pretty good job of just figuring it out themselves. Actually, they do. It's an effective team. It really is.
Yeah, and then like the last kind of overarching part was the when you find out Billy is like this, son of Captain Marvel and like the son of this Skrull Queen. The Skrulls were like big shapeshifters, really big villains in the Marvel universe. They're always invading, always invading all the time. They're mostly portrayed as bad guys, which in the MCU right now they're not. But I could see them flipping the script again. We'll see. There's a lot of feelings there.
Bring it back. Bring it back, yeah.
Bring it back. But the Super Scroll actually makes like appearance, and he has like all 4 powers of like the Fantastic Four. So you get like to catch up on like where he last left off, what he's going through, and he's like, "Oh, I gotta save you." So he's kind of on their side, but also like I'm coming to capture you, but I'm taking you against your will. And
I
so there's
always
this whole
liked Super
politics of
Skrull.
that. Yeah.
I don't know. He was always a good Super Skrull and Kang and Doctor
Yes.
Doom. Like I just always thought they were great characters. And Kang actually does a really good job in this comic where he puts up this like logical argument
Yeah.
of, hey, you could fight me and you could kill me, but then I'm the only one that is holding together the time stream. So then
Mm-hmm.
like you would end up dooming all of yourselves. And
Right.
so he always has that sort of ace up his sleeve of like,
Mm-hmm.
just let me do what I
I want.
want, because I'm the only one holding all this together.
Yeah.
And no one knows if he's ever bluffing. Like, you like this stand there
Yeah.
like, well, I guess he's from the
From the
future.
Yep.
And then Super Scroll was just,
Yeah.
he was like an experiment that took all four Fantastic Four's powers. And then
Mhm.
he's like, the scrolls don't respect him because
No,
he's
he tries to do
a
all these
traitor.
noble intentions, but then he always ends up failing, or it doesn't go against his moral beliefs. So he's like, okay, fine.
The scrolls are like, we don't have to listen to you. You're a traitor.
Yep.
But he's really their biggest cheerleader. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
So
an
yeah,
awkward situation.
right. And I also liked how this series picks up more into the day in the life of like the Young Avengers, right?
Yes.
We don't really skim over that. That's what really is the core of this team, or at least this core of this run is like, what do you do in between of like not fighting a villain? Or how do you find out more about these characters and do build this character investment, right? You get into those interactions, which is something that I think really connected it with me when I started picking this up and why I still remember that run. There's so much going on, like character interaction and
Well,
just
they're
this
kind
different
of
social.
building their characters as the issues go on. So like,
Yeah.
I just came across when Patriot gets his shield.
Yes.
And when like Kate Bishop gets her costume.
Yeah.
And it's like they are all figuring out their own identity as a superhero
Mm-hmm.
through the issues with the reader. And that's kind of,
Yeah.
you're right there with them.
Mm-hmm.
And then as they're kind of fighting and doing other battles, then of course they start building relationships among each other as team members.
Yes.
And that part of it too is something that was new at the time with Wiccan and Hulkling.
Yeah. So that was really cool. Yeah, this was one of the first Wiccan and Hulkling were one of the first gay couples on the Avengers, or I guess in Avengers history, really. And that was really cool to see something just stick out like that.
Mhm.
And for Eli to be one of the for like a black character being portrayed as like Captain America-esque character.
Right.
And, yes, they went retconned a bit saying, oh, there was other, that black Captain America and his grandfather, and they could tell those stories. But you have to start somewhere first.
Yeah.
And so that was really cool to see them play more into it and just kind of just do some different character and social dynamics that we don't see all the time.
Well, and like that was the perfect time too to introduce it as a fresh start, because
Yeah.
I think if they took a character that had already been around for a while and they just said, hey, by the way, they're going to be our first gay couple here, I think that might have been like forced.
Yeah, they
People
really
might have-
eased into it.
Yep.
Yeah.
This one, they said these are two new characters and they both have an attraction for each other, and we're going to write that into the story.
Yeah.
I think was a good choice as far as Marvel's introduction, well, just sort of stepping into that pond,
Right.
and it really, it kind of just flowed into the story. You didn't
Mhm.
really notice. It wasn't like a big deal. It was
Yeah.
just there.
Sure.
And you could tell they were looking out for each other, and they just had that attraction. So it was cool.
Right. And then they also introduced Speedy,
Yes.
which is
Or just Speed.
Speed, yes,
Speed.
Speed. And so he is basically Wiccan's brother. He's a twin brother though. So then they know like something is up. So then you find out like their mom might be the Scarlet Witch.
Yeah. You're like, all right, Wiccan and Speed. And so you have
There's
the
strong
powers of-
possibility.
yeah. Wiccan was like very much a witch.
Yep.
And then Speed was very much like Quicksilver.
Yes.
So they just
like
had this,
almost
family
like,
trace.
oh hey, you're almost like verbatim. Like,
Yeah. Like this is exactly who you
we may
are.
have a little nuances to each other, but yeah, so that was really cool to like kind of tie that plot line of like, hey, the Scarlet Witch had kids. She was upset she lost her kids, But then, hey, here comes these two characters that have the exact powers and facial features and all the things that her kids had. So it was really good, like to tie that in was Chef's Kiss.
Yeah. Yeah, it went just right. And it's starting to fill out into an actual Avengers roster.
Yeah, a
It's
team.
funny because Kate Bishop has no powers,
Yeah.
and she just naturally knew how to shoot a bow and arrow.
Yeah,
And
she was taught, I think, by her father had like trained her on those
yes,
things.
so she's very good on the field. And as she was introduced as a bride, that they like
Yeah.
broke up her wedding or something,
Yeah.
she just said, "Hey, you know what? I've been training my life for this." So it was, I don't know,
Right. She gets handed like Hawkeye's bow, which was a huge moment.
yeah, like nothing actually just appeared as uh, a forced narrative. It really was a well drawn out story. And the artwork was great.
Yeah, I guess we could that's a good talking point for the artwork. So Jim Cheung, he is a great comic book artist. He is one of my favorite artists to follow. And I didn't know, like, he started in the 90s with CrossGen, and he did other series like X-Force, which was really cool. He had some tales on like late Iron Man, the 90s Black Knight, Maverick. So really 90s looking art. But then as the technology got better and his art got better, he kind of forms the style that he has now. And it was like all with compliments to like his creative team of his colorist and inker that kind of worked with him. But man, it kind of gives me that feeling of when we read Aquaman by Jeff Johns,
Hmm.
and then he had Ivan Reyes with him. He
Hmm.
developed that whole style of this kind of like modern, like superhero, like how modern superheroes look like. That's how I think Jim Chung looks. Is like, how does a modern superhero?
Yeah, the one thing I noticed about Jim Chung's work is that there's a tremendous amount of like grit. There's a lot
Yeah,
of like detail. There's a lot of little scratches and little kind of debris in the air. But his characters always are like holding themselves as a superhero.
yeah,
That they're
very
they're
heroic,
really really
bold.
good.
Yeah,
Brian Hitch does a really great job of
yeah,
that too. It's just
sure.
every panel is some sort of dramatic pose,
Yeah,
and
I think
there's
he's really good expressions.
yeah,
Yeah,
and you get that sense everyone is just powerful on the page, and it really makes the um the visual go by easier. And the writing in this was kind of like what you would consider normal banter, like
yes,
it was easy reading because there wasn't giant blocks of text that were, it was just
no,
what you would consider if you were in a battle, you'd be saying 5 or 6 words here and 3 or 4 words there. I mean, you're busy doing other things, you're not
absolutely.
just
And
like
I think
spouting out this
I
narrative.
And I think this was kind of like the moment, or I guess probably the new Avengers were too, but like how you a less dialogue heavy Avengers run is,
Right.
or like what is modern superhero comics. This was kind of like that start of it, where it's more action driven. It's more the story's told more on the page versus somebody explaining it to you.
Right, you're trimming the fat.
Yeah,
And from what we had sort of put together earlier too, the writer was very used to writing TV shows,
yeah,
including Gilmore Girls, which is just
yes, uh huh.
Gilmore Girls was like super heavy
Yep.
dialogue,
The
just
OC was
a
another
lot.
huge series he worked on. He worked on Grey's Anatomy. He worked on Sex and the City, The Naked Truth, Party of Five. So he did a lot of
Those
work
are
in
all
television.
huge narrative
Yeah.
like series. They're just constant dialogue.
Yeah. And so in this omnibus, they do a good job of like having a bunch of extras and interviews and things. And so he was just having lunch with Joe Quesada because they were like big comic fans. And he was like, oh, okay, I'll have lunch with you. And so they were kind of pitching ideas back and forth. And this was one of the ideas that stuck. And I think Joe Quesada kind of helped him come up with the idea of Young Avengers and kind of fleshed it out. And the biggest part that he had the difficult time with was writing a script. He was used to writing television script, which is very different than comic book script.
Which is a lot long. You get a lot more time to talk.
Yeah, a
I
lot more
think that's what it
dialogue
is.
driven. Yeah,
Yeah, and the recording something on video is
yeah,
way different than trying to just distill it down into a page.
sure. He said, I guess when he was doing work for television, he would have to like not leave any notes of like what the panel would look like or what the visuals look like less. He would just focus on more of like what the dialogue would be and how the progressions would work. This, when he was doing for comics, he had to really work and develop like what the panel looks like, how he wants certain movements. He was really working with Jim Cheung and like how to flush it out. So in that first script, he was like really procrastinating. He's like, "Hey, Joe Quesada, you're the editor in chief. Yeah, I'm having a hard time. Can I just submit it as a TV script? Yeah, we'll work on that." So the more he got practice into,
Yeah, of like 120 pages.
yeah, right. Like, here, we'll distill it down and get a feel for the characters. And one of the other changes that where I was looking at the extras, Hulkling was actually supposed to be a female. Their name was supposed to be Chimera. And so even though he's like a shapeshifter right now, like he was supposed to be way more feminine. So I think that was something later, probably in the writing process in that first issue, like, oh, let's not do that. This is more interesting angle we could go on.
So then they only had one female on the group.
Yeah, well, they didn't start with any females. So that was also something like, hey, that's going to be part of our arc. And they, what I guess Allen Heinberg was really good with was, he was used to working in TV where you would have to like pitch 13 episodes, right? A huge season. And he would have to be upfront about where is the show going. And so that way he could like pitch it. And so the TV network would, be secure about those feelings. Otherwise, when you're going into it and you don't know what's going on, they're like, oh, where's this going? Are you just making this up on the fly? So he's very much like a very long vision, like, where is this going? So he knew he was developing female characters as well to have the team. So that was like all this book. I'm like, oh my God, that's kind of cool.
And that's another one of the benefits of buying an omnibus, is because you get a lot of that sort of background.
Yeah, if you're nerdy about it, you're like, oh my God, I love this run. Yeah, or like you want to know what was kind of going down. Absolutely.
Well, and it's cool to just see like exactly how this came into being, because the nice part about this run too is that it does continue into other books, and it does continue into and sort of the memory of this comic is going to be eventually filtering into the MCU and everything else. I really do feel like this is the direction. I mean, people have been talking about Young Avengers for a long time.
And they wouldn't introduce those characters unless they were going somewhere with it. Sure, you want to develop sidekicks and legacy characters, but also like the pieces are on the table.
Yeah.
You're not going to put the toys in the sandbox?
Yeah.
I can't play with them?
They're already here.
They're already here.
We've seen them with our own eyes. Just put them together.
Yeah, I would really enjoy it.
And one thing I always liked about Marvel comics, I mean, I guess just comics in general, is that, when you have older characters show up with newer characters, because like Spider-Man shows up and Luke Cage shows up, and I like that they're always in character and they're responding how you would expect them to respond. And that's always been just sort of this great topping to all of these stories, is that when you bring in a character, they're like not breaking what you would imagine them saying.
Right. They fit in kind of.
Yeah.
Or they have some sort of goal or intention for the characters. We want this character to sound like this, or to, we want readers of this particular kind to get that, because that's what our intentions are.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, like, Allen Heinberg's like big thing was he was already a comic nerd. He was already like researching the West Coast Avengers, Roy Thomas's run on Avengers, and he was a huge fan of Jeff Johns' Teen Titans run. And so with all those pieces and all those influences, this was a good time to like write the Young Avengers, because there wasn't really a lot of young teams or like sidekicks besides like Bucky, Anthony, and those like teenage super heroic characters that paired off with the Avengers. They're all very standalone, or they're all adults. Like I think Peter Parker, he was a high school, but he didn't have like a sidekick really.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true too, because later on in the run, which was like issue 10, 11, 12 or so, something like that, they kind of come up upon this possibility that the group needs to fracture a little bit. That a couple of members need to leave because they have other responsibilities that just showed up. Well, as a reader, by that time, you've established a connection with them that you're
Yeah.
like, well, I don't want this team to break up. They seem to be
You're right.
doing
Oh
well
yeah,
together.
they kind of fall apart. They're like, oh, we're gonna
Yeah.
that didn't work. Oh, we screwed up.
It's like they're working out together, you know?
Mhm.
So then you start rooting for the characters. And that's just
Yeah.
another version of that sort of a drama that they put into comics is, you know, we're gonna get all these guys together, and then just when you think you like them, we're gonna just start filtering them back out. And it does make you want to see where the story is going, and it does make you want to, you know,
Invest your
continue.
time and your energy into your characters,
Yeah.
and just really like follow them and see what their journey is. Definitely have yes, there is tropiness to it, but it's done really, really eloquently and really intelligent, and it's really smart how they just develop these characters over time.
Well, I saw this as like a 12-issue origin story.
Yeah,
That's pretty
I
much
guess.
the way
Yeah,
that
they didn't really rush it. They kind of
No.
let it develop.
They took a long time to develop the characters and to build the team. I mean,
Mhm.
the team wasn't built in the first issue.
Yeah.
It was like maybe the fourth.
Core,
or fifth.
yeah, it's like your founders. Okay.
Yeah. And then people are like, "Oh, I want to be part of your team." Sure, come on in.
Mhm.
And so by the time you get to the 12th issue, they've had a few runs, and they've actually shown themselves against some pretty powerful enemies, and so you're rooting for them.
Absolutely. And then after the initial 12 issue series, then they go on to what's collected in here is they go on to Civil War, which was a huge. This was kind of like when you see like the Young Avengers in that first run, you're like, oh yeah, this was kind of really building up to like what was going on in Civil
Like,
War and all. of
Everyone
them.
was involved in Civil War.
Yeah. That was one of my favorite runs. Maybe we'll cover that someday. But, so they go into Civil War, they go into Secret Invasion, they go into Dark Reign when all is lost. So it's a very dark time in the Marvel universe. And then this run ends with the Young Avengers Children's Crusade, where it's basically the end cap to the first run, because they go on to look for the Scarlet Witch, and she was kind of removed from the Marvel universe for a long time, since like after Avengers Disassembled. Like
Yeah.
you didn't hear anything
3 or 4 years we just
until
heard, yeah.
like they start putting seeds a little bit, but very sparingly, because that either they knew they were going to bring her back eventually, or until somebody like, hey, we'll do it. Okay. Because I think that series came out in like 2012. So there was like a big, I don't know, 7-8 year gap of like, hey, okay, we'll do this run. And when you read that, it's a perfect end cap to what we just read. So I definitely,
So it all came around full circle.
it all came around full circle. Absolutely. I did the extra credit because I just love this run, so I just breezed through it this week. That's how much I love these characters, and no matter who's writing it or what the artist was, yes, Allen Heinberg, I think, and Jim Cheung, they're like the owners and the creators of like these characters. So when they do get to write them, they just nail it, right? They know how they think and feel, but you know, other teams can pick up on it. And after this omnibus goes into the Karen Gillan run with Jamie McPhillan, it's a little different feel because they introduced like America Chavez on it, and young Loki and a few other characters. So they changed the dynamic a bit. But this was the run that connected with me the most. So yeah.
I thought it was fun. It's just
Yeah.
fun read. And if you are an Avengers fan, or if you read anything past Avengers, they do enough Easter eggs in there that you really feel like, hey, that's quirky. Hey, that's a good
Yes.
idea. You know, it was just a fun little pocket of comics. So glad to have this as our 50th. And I
Yeah.
think that this will be a new reboot for the MCU and or Disney.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's our prediction.
Well, yes, we hope to see these characters and these feelings and some of these moments on the live screen and some live adaptation, hopefully down the road. Someday. Thanks for tuning in to our 50th episode. And this has been another great episode of Band Pow Comic Hour.
Here's to another 50.
Woo!
All right. Bye-bye.
This is Andrew Garner
and Chris Ramos.
signing off.